Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Jeffries. I'm a captain paramedic with the City of Mesa Fire and Medical Department, and I'm the president of the Professional Firefighters of Arizona. And I also want to introduce who's co-joining me today, and it's Will Buvadas.
Hi, I'm Will Buvadas. I'm the treasurer and chief negotiator for the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association, and we're going to talk about pension reform today.
That's right. Just to give a little bit of background, the Professional Firefighters of Arizona have been working on this project going all the way back to 2011. And I want to mention that our entire team at the PFFA have been completely dedicated to trying to form some kind of resolution to this. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorneys, on actuaries, on lobbyists, and everybody to come together and try to fix this thing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation.
So the problem, as you all know, or I'm sure have heard, that our pension system right now is under 50% funded. We have some serious issues that we have to deal with, and like Brian has said, we've been working for the past over a year now to try to make fixes to that. Some of the challenges we have is that the value of our fund has dropped significantly. Currently, we have over $7 billion of unfunded liabilities that have to be paid off by the cities. Part of that reason for that is because there's been two drastic market downturns. You know, in 2001, the fund was mostly invested in high-tech stocks. That went down. And then in 07 and 08, the fund lost money due to the overall market downturn of the financial crisis. There's been several structural flaws that have led to our system in crisis. The main one being, which we'll get into here in a little bit, is the PBI, or permanent benefit increase. That structure of that benefit is seriously, fundamentally flawed. And so in turn, employer contributions have spiked. For example, the city of Phoenix now puts over 50% of payroll into the pension system. Some other cities like Tucson, over 75% of payroll. And as you guys know, a few years ago, there was Senate Bill 1609. Most of that bill has been struck down. And so we got to do some stuff to address the issues contained in there. As you see here in the chart on your screen, the system was, back in 2003, over 100% funded. Over time, the system now is at under 50% funded at 48%. And as you can see on the red part of the chart, that's the underfunded liabilities. So obviously, when the system was 100% funded, there was zero unfunded liabilities, and now today there's just under $7 billion of unfunded liability. So, what are the main causes of the PSPRS problem? Number one is underperforming investment returns. Over the past few years, PSPRS has underperformed its assumed earning rates to 7.5%. So every year it does not hit 7.5%, it adds to the unfunded liabilities, which then increase, or in turn, increase the employer's contribution rates. Number two, unrealistic rate of return. Again, currently the rate of return is about 7.5%. That's what the fund assumes it'll earn every year. The consultants and actuaries have said that number should be closer to 5% given the current PBI benefit. And then the big reason is the permanent benefit increase. Over the past 29 years, up until this year, the fund gave out a 4% COLA increase every single year for the last 29 years.
Just to illustrate what Will just mentioned, let's take a look at this graph. If you look at the different lines on this graph right here, you'll see three different colors. One of them looks like a bad EKG for my paramedics that are watching, and that is the actual rate of return for the PSPRS over that amount of time. Then you have a line, a fairly straight line going across the graph, and that shows the assumed earnings rate that PSPRS uses to determine our benefits. The challenge we face is the red line that you see on the screen is what's known as the actuarially valued rate of return, and that shows, as you go back to about 2001, that we've not been hitting our assumed earnings rate of 7.5% over all those years, which spans more than a decade. So what does that mean? Well, as Will mentioned earlier, that 7.5% that they've been using as an assumed earnings rate, at least if you go back over the last decade, is just too high of a number to be shooting for to be able to continue with our current benefit structure. And we've gotten with some financial experts who have done an analysis of the system, and they've looked at some of the trends in the market, and what they're saying to us now is that the chances of us to be able to meet that 7.5% assumed earnings rate over the next several years is less than 50%. And to put that into context for you a little bit, think about we have a better chance at a coin flip than we do of reaching the 7.5%. So if the pattern, going back to that other slide for a moment, continues at around a 5% actuarially valued earnings, our chances of the system going even deeper into the hole are very high, which means employer contribution rates will continue to rise. And let me show you this graph here, and it'll give you an estimation of what I'm saying. This is the current state of our PSPRS, and what you're looking at here is a graph that shows you basically the trend line of the employer contributions across the state of Arizona. The light blue lines going top to bottom that you see, those are there to help pay off the unfunded liability, or what I call the credit card debt that must be paid. All right, and so over the span of several years, those rates are going to stay very high until they come back down in a few decades. All right, so but the problem with this graph is it's showing you what employer contributions will do if we stay at 7.5%. But again, that's assuming we're going to earn 7.5%. But if you go back over the last decade, where we've been averaging a little over 5%, now let's go to the next graph and see what will happen to those employer contribution rates if we go along the same trend line that we've been on for several years. You can see that those contribution rates get up 90, even 100%. Imagine if our employers' contribution rates over the next 2 decades double what most of them are today. It's going to be an absolute catastrophe, and it'll take us from where we are today at over almost $7 billion in what I call the credit card debt to increase even further from there. So let's talk a little bit about why we're here today and what the risks of inaction are. Let me just be clear. These steps that we're contemplating moving forward with are painful, and we don't like any of them. But the risks of inaction are so much greater. First of all, as I just mentioned, rising employer contributions will impact all of us. That is going to create an inability for us to create or to fill open positions in police and fire. It'll curb the amount of monies that we have for training and even our most basic necessary tools to do our jobs. And in some places, certainly it's going to impact our ability to get raises in the future. A lot of us just went through the Great Recession. A lot of us didn't get raises and even took pay cuts. Imagine if those employer contributions continue to go up. They're not going to be able to give out any wages possibly for a decade or more. And then with that, some of the cities and towns might consider alternative tax resources to try to help them in this crisis. We look at the city of Prescott. Prescott just went through a PSPRS initiative that they took to their voters, a referendum they took to their voters, and they asked for some tax relief to help them pay off what I keep referring to as the credit card debt. And the voters rejected it almost outright. They said, no, we don't want to pay any more for this. So with failed efforts like this, we could have further problems. And what this ultimately results in is some service level insolvency. And that means an inability for us to provide our basic public safety services to the public that we all took an oath to serve. And in some cases, and we have some very severe cases right here in Arizona, such as Prescott, Bisbee, some others whose situations are getting so dire, some of them at some point may look at municipal bankruptcy. And imagine what a catastrophe that could be if they go into bankruptcy, and what that could mean for all of us. So inaction is absolutely not a choice. Had we not come to the table, the legislature most certainly was going to force something even more severe on us than a lot of us would have ever wanted to live with. Retirees might have faced decades without any increases whatsoever, and the new generation of people that are going to come after us might have faced a much more drastic cut in their pensions and their retirements. So let's talk a little bit about the process. Will?
Yeah, the process, as we all know, after 1609 passed and was sued on, there's some people who sued 1609. Some of 1609 got overturned in courts, which put us in a worse situation. At that point in time, the firefighters, State Firefighters Union, took the lead, started developing some framework on pension reform. Early on in the process, PLE was involved in it, and then since then, the FOP and APA and others have come along and joined the discussion. As part of the stakeholder working groups, also there's people from the governor's office. There's also the legislative pension work group. led by Senator Lesko. And the League of Cities and Towns has also been involved for about the past 6 months. The other component to the process has been the Reason Foundation. They have been involved for probably about the past 6 to 8 months. Senator Lesko and the Republicans down there invited them basically to be the negotiators for the legislators. And I got to tell you, at first, I don't know about you, Brian, but at first I was very nervous about them being involved, and I had preconceived notions about what they stood for, but they've actually been very good to work with. They've listened to us. They incorporated many of our suggestions, which I don't think they necessarily wanted to, but I thought they wanted to put us all in a 401k plan system, and that has been further from the truth. That has never come up in any of our discussions of going to a straight 401k system in the future.
I was surprised by that too, Will. The two gentlemen, Pete Constant and Leonard, have been really good to work with, and they brought a lot of expertise. I mean, there's things about certain pension systems around the country that I didn't know of, some best practices or some things other systems have done to get themselves out of these situations, and I agree, they have been good to work with. It wasn't the fight that I was expecting.
So let's talk about the solution. First, let's go into what the different tiers are, okay? There currently, or there will be 3 tiers. It's really 4 tiers. The first tier we call Tier 1, and those are people who had 20 years of service prior to January 1st of 2012. The second tier, called Tier 2A, are those who were hired prior to January 12. The third tier, we'll call it 2B, are those hired after January 12 but before July of 17. And then there's Tier 3, and those are hired after January 17th. And I think just the other day we found out that actually it's going to be pushed back now. July 1st of 2017 will be the start date of Tier 3.
That's right.
So let's talk about Tier 1. This is important to note here, there is only one change for Tier 1. So if you had 20 years of service on before January 1st of 2012, there's only one change that affects you, and that's in your COLA for when you retire. So for Tier 1 members, the existing permanent benefit increase will be replaced with an actual cost of living COLA. And the COLA will be a maximum of 2% per year compounded, or Phoenix Mesa CPI, Consumer Price Index, whichever is lower. So if CPI is 2.5%, your COLA will be 2%. If CPI is 1.75%, your COLA will be 1.75%. And also another change as far as part of the COLA, it will be a true COLA. So it will be based on your pension amount. Currently, the PBI is based on the average pension amount in the state. This new system, it will be based on your actual pension amount.
So let's move on to Tier 2A. And the good news is that I don't have to say any more than Will just did, because it is identical. It's a mirror image of Tier 1. Let me repeat what he said. There is only one change for Tier 2A. Everybody in that tier will have one change only, and it's identical. We're going to have a new CPI-based COLA to a maximum of 2% to replace the current permanent benefit increase. And as Will said, it is a compounding COLA based on your specific retirement and whatever number you leave with, to a maximum of 2%. That's the only change for Tier 2A. Let's move on to Tier 2B. So Tier 2B is anybody that was hired after January 2012, and as a reminder, that date is specific because that's when 1609 was enacted. While a lot of the elements of SB 1609 are being overturned by the courts, there are certain elements that will continue and are there today because they were enacted for future hires back then. Those are not being overturned by the courts, and which is why Tier 2B gets a little more complicated, if you will. So first of all, the COLA that we just described for you will be exactly the same for Tier 2B as it is for Tier 2A as well as Tier 1. In addition, there is no change to the underlying pension. You will remain having a 2.5% multiplier. And for those that don't know what the multiplier means, that means 2.5% times 25 years will yield you 62.5. All the way up to a maximum, if you go 32 years, you get 80%. 32 times 2.5, right? So that's what the 2.5% multiplier means. As it is today, you will have to work 25 years minimum to get to your benefit. However, that is current law. There is no change to what we're living under right now. Add to that, minimum age is still 52.5. That's exactly what you're living under right now. It's been that way since January 2012. We're still moving forward with that same age. Just as a review, drop went away after January 2012, but that will now be replaced with a new mandatory defined contribution plan. This new defined contribution plan is actually going to be an excellent way to save monies from both the employee and the employer moving forward, to have a nice pot of money when you go to retire to utilize. You can invest it in the market and utilize for your retirement. Now, one caveat to that we need to add, that defined contribution plan will only be for those people that do not participate in Social Security. It's interesting, on the fire side, that's about 95% or so of our participants in the PSPRS do not participate in Social Security. There are a few out there. On the police side, there are more folks and more employers out there where the officers do participate in Social Security. And what's interesting is that when we looked at this plan in total, we saw big disparities of both benefits as well as expenses between those that do and do not participate in Social Security. So to create some equity throughout the plan, this was one of the solutions we came up with. So just to be clear, this new defined contribution for Tier 2B will only be for those who do not participate in Social Security. Now, one piece of this is that if you were hired between January 2012 and today, hypothetically speaking, you could be in a situation where that new defined contribution that you're going to add to your benefits could be less than someone that gets hired after 2017. Well, don't fret, because we created a makeup period in the legislation that allows the employers to make up for the deficit for the years of service that you provide, and we'll get more into that later. But the bottom line is there'll be a makeup period to help you start to fill your defined contribution account. So let's move on to Tier 2-3 and the new hires. Will?
Yeah, Tier 2-3, obviously most of the changes that affect the membership happen in Tier 2-3. Now, again, this is for people who are only hired after July 1st of 2017, or about 18 months from now. So there's a lot of good stuff about Tier 2-3, some stuff that the Republicans insisted be in there. But overall, I think Tier 2-3 is going to be a sustainable plan and provide our members with a good defined benefit. The first thing is the multiplier stays the same. So the 2.5% multiplier stays the same. So at 25 years, they'll still get 62.5%, and at 32 years, they'll still get 80% of their high five. The second issue is DROP is now replaced by that new deferred comp plan. So the one where the employer puts 3% in and you put 3% in if you're not in Social Security, that now will grow through your whole career, and by the end you should have a couple $100,000 at least in there to have your own little DROP account. Another change that was made is that the minimum benefit age will be increased by 2.5 years, so it'll be 55 with 25 years of accredited service. Interesting note, the system ran some numbers for us, and over the last 5 years, the average age of entry into PSPRS for both police and fire was almost identical, and it was 29.5 years. So those people today, coming on today, already have to work till they're 54 and a half to meet the 25-year minimum trigger for a pension. There's also going to be a new benefit here, kind of like with Social Security, where you can get reduced Social Security earlier. Here you can still leave at 52 and a half, and you get an actuarially reduced benefit to make up for leaving 2.5 years early, as long as you have the 25 years of service. Another change for the new hires will be that contributions will be split 50-50. So if the employer contribution is 18%, or the total contribution is 18%, the employee will pay 9%, and the employer will pay 9%. What's important to note here is that this is only for their tier. So they will not have to pay contributions on all the unfunded liabilities that have piled up over the years for Tier 1 and Tier 2. They're only paying their contribution rate on their tier, on their assets, on their liabilities. Right now, the estimate is that their total cost will be somewhere between 18 and 20%. So their part of that will be 9 to 10% of their salary. Again, there's no responsibility for the prior pension debt. And another new benefit for them is the addition of the 3% employee-employer split for those who are not in Social Security. That will go into a 401A defined contribution account, which will be portable, which will be theirs. And so when they retire, they'll have that lump sum of money to use as they see fit. And there's also another option, and that's the DC-only plan. So they could, if for whatever reason they don't want to go into the DB plan, they could go into the deferred comp plan where they pay 9% and the employer pays 9%, and it works just like a normal 401k type of plan.
That's right, Will. And one of the things I just want to hit up right now is that I got to tell everybody this 50-50 idea was a very, very difficult idea for us to digest during these deliberations. I mean, we hated the idea, to be perfectly honest with you. But what's interesting about this, and one of the things we've learned, is that, first of all, none of us ever want this system to go off the rails ever again. And one of the things that I believe moving forward that the next generation is going to have to do is be far more vigilant in watching and monitoring what's happening with the system. And one of the things that's important, and it's especially important for those of us that represent the firefighter and police officer associations in the room, is that when our folks have skin in the game that can rise and fall with those contribution rates, we're going to be very intensely monitoring the behavior of the investments and what folks are doing at PSPRS to try to keep those contribution rates as low as possible. And part of that, I think that'll come with a lot of folks down at the system keeping close eye, being very conservative with our monies.
I would agree, Brian. On the next slide here, it just shows the different options you have as a new hire coming in 2017. Again, you'll have an option of either selecting the new Tier 3 defined benefit hybrid plan or the 100% defined contribution plan. It just shows that if you're in Social Security, you have a choice of the DB plan only plus Social Security, or the DC plan only plus Social Security. And if you're not in Social Security, you get a choice of the DB DC hybrid plan, which is the DB plan. So you still get 80% of 32 years plus the 3% employee and the 3% employer match into a 401A plan, or you can choose the DC only 9% plan. Another thing that this bill addresses, which was left out of Senate Bill 1609, is it adds a reduced multiplier for if you don't make 25 years of service. So as long as you have 55, as long as you're 55 years old, you can retire with a reduced pension. This is good for the people who come on later on in life. We have cops that sometimes come on in their 50s. Obviously, they're not going to work until their 80s, which is how long they would have to work to be eligible for a pension. So under this plan, as long as you have 15 years of service, and you can see it on the slide, you have a reduced pension. It goes up. It starts at 1.5% multiplier, then goes all the way up to the 2.5% multiplier, which is the same as current at 25 years of service. What's important to note is as soon as you hit any of these years, it's retroactive. So once you hit 25 years, all your years of service get credited at 2.5%. And once you hit 19 years, and if you left at year 19, all 19 years would be credited at 2% multiplier.
I have to give the police officers a lot of credit on two of these factors that came into play. First of all, as they mentioned, they do have a lot of officers that come in, maybe they work in the private sector for many years, decide they want to midlife, want to have a call to service and a call to duty with police, and they come in at say 45 years old. Well, the idea that they can work another 25 years to earn a pension is pretty difficult. But so they've got two options now that they've never had before. One is this idea that they could take a reduced pension, still walk away with maybe 30% after 15 years of service or so. Or if they have spent an entire career up to that point in the defined contribution world with a 401k, they may just elect to come into that 9% defined contribution option that will be there for them, which may be a good and meaningful way for them to go as well. So with that, let's move forward with the another portion of Tier 3 under the hybrid plan. So we're under the defined benefit element that Will described. There's a couple things we want to mention as well. We talked about the COLA structure for Tier 1, Tier 2A, and Tier 2B being exactly the same. In Tier 3, it changes only slightly. The COLA itself will be the same. It'll be the Consumer Price Index for the Phoenix and Mesa region up to a maximum of 2%. There's only one caveat that we added, and I think you'll appreciate why we did so. The caveat that we added was that as long as the system is well funded, it will continue to pay out COLAs as needed. However, if something ever happens in the future and for some reason the plan starts to become underfunded, it will start to thin the COLAs they give out until it gets well funded again. So the example here, or the situation I should say, is that if the funded ratio of the plan is between 80 and 89%, then the COLA would be reduced to a maximum of 1.5%. Then if we go down even further and the plan becomes underfunded and is only funded 70 to 79%, then the cap would be reduced to to 1%. If we get below 70%, COLAs will be suspended until we get healthy again. It's interesting, I mean, to look back, I mean, I don't think anyone would have designed this purposely if they had known the situation we're in today. But now here we are, well under 50% funded, and we've been paying out 4% raises compounded for the last 29 consecutive years. And giving big raises while the fund is going south is just not a bright way to go. So we wanted to build these guardrails in to protect our plan for the future. In addition, any of these COLAs that are paid out are going to be pre-funded and actually accounted for in advance. So instead of putting them on the credit card, we're going to be paying for these COLAs in advance so the system doesn't get out of whack. And they're going to, and for our new hires, those COLAs they'll be eligible at either 7 years after they retire or age 60, whichever comes first. And for a lot of folks, that'll be age 55 when they retire, which means only 5 years they'll have to wait to receive their very first cost of living adjustment. Okay, the next phase of the plan involves some of the caps that were put in. I don't have to tell all of you watching this that any of you that have read a newspaper over the last few years, there's been all this discussion about pension spiking and the big pensions that some people walk away with. That has been a tremendous point of discussion for us down there at the legislature and dealing with our state leaders. I've found that most of the folks we're at the table with really believe in their police and firefighters. They want us to have good retirements, but they also are concerned about some of the levels of some of the folks leaving. So for Tier 3, and again, just a reminder, these are only people that don't work here yet. Nobody that's currently working is affected by what I'm about to say. But there'll be a cap on the total pensionable income of $110,000. So to give you an example, if somebody goes the full 32 years and they get 80% of that, they would get $96,000 a year pension. So one important thing to mention, though, is that nobody for at least 26 years will be retiring out of that plan. That number, $110,000, will scale up along with our wages. There's a basket of employers that have been, it's 10% of the total system, and the system will monitor the wage increases of those particular employers. And as those go up, the index for this 110,000 will go up. So for example, let's say 110 over the next 20 or 30 years grows at a 2 to 4% growth rate with wages. That number will likely double by the time anybody actually retires under that part of the plan, upwards of $200,000 or so. So in addition, Will mentioned earlier that in order to receive the benefits, somebody in this plan will have to get the maximum benefit, get to 55 years old. But it's really important that we say that people will still be eligible to leave at 52 and a half, but they'll get what's known as an actuarially equivalent pension. So let's just say, for example, somebody leaves at 55 years old. And the system gives them a kind of a mortality table of how long they're expected to live. Kind of strange, but that's how they can figure it out. So let's say that total value of your pension is, say, $2 million. Well, all they would do is take that $2 million and break that up over the number of months that you're expected to be drawing from the system, and then just add 2.5 years to that. So your monthly income will go down just a bit, but you'll still get the same pot of money. All right, the last piece on the Tier 3 hybrid plan is the defined contribution element. And again, we just want to reiterate that this is only for the folks that are not in Social Security, excuse me. The employees will be required to pay 3%, and the employers will be required to pay 3%. And so that will build up over the course of those folks' careers so they can have a nice pot of money that, as Will mentioned before, will be portable, that they can use for retirement.
So some might be wondering why we delineated between those with Social Security and those without Social Security, and there's a very good reason for that. On the next slide, there's a chart that shows, and if you look at this chart, you can see it better on your screen, I hope, and that is the agencies that have Social Security that you pay for through your whole career. It does not get reduced when you retire. The Windfall Elimination Protection Act does not reduce your Social Security like it does for agencies that don't pay Social Security throughout their whole career. So For somebody in an agency with Social Security, if you look at the bottom number there, their total benefit once they hit Social Security age at age 62 will be almost 95% of their working income. So they're going to get almost 95% of their working income when they hit age 62. Somebody in the no Social Security plan, where you have the same defined benefit plan, then you have the 3% deferred compensation match, will get their benefit will still be significantly less than those with Social Security. They'll be at just under 80%. Plus, the people on Social Security are already putting 6.5% of their salary, and the employer is putting 6.5% or so into the Social Security system every paycheck. So that's the reason why we made a difference between those in Social Security and those without Social Security, because that Social Security benefit is such a large part of their total pension income when they hit age 62.
So that is an explanation of the 3 tiers, including Tier 2A and 2B, which really makes it like 4 tiers, sort of. Moving forward, I want to just put them side by side so you can kind of take a look at each generation and see that even though we have made some dramatic changes to the pension system, if you really look at it side by side, there's not that dramatic of a change, because remember, we felt very strongly that we needed everybody to participate in this. This is our pension system. Those that are retired, those currently working, and those that will come after us. Everybody participates in this to help fix the plan. But if you go across there, I'm not going to go through all these elements, but if you look at this slide, and we'll be sending this out so you can show it to all the folks out there, shows that there's not that dramatic of a difference from tier to tier. You're still going to get, if you participate in the pension plan, you're still going to get 50% pension if you leave at 20. You're still going to get 80% if you leave at 32, and that's a really important element. So with the pension reform, there was not just a focus on economic issues or pay issues and compensation issues. There was also a focus on how the plan is run. How can we do things that'll prevent us from ever being in this situation again? And that's what we call governance reform. And a couple things play into that. One was, we said that if we are going to, from this point in the future for our new hires, take on 50% of the risk of the plan by paying 50% and 50% into the system, we also want to have a lot more representation on that board. So during our deliberations, we doubled the number of police officers and firefighters and/or our representatives that will be on the board. And we think that's important, because we need watchdogs on that board watching what's going on and watching what they're doing with our investments and watching for trends. If the fund is starting to become underfunded, we want everybody in this state pension plan to know about it and to pay attention and to start taking whatever action we need to never let this happen again. Number 2, any unfunded liabilities associated with any future benefits will be immediately fully paid in the year that they're enacted. And again, what this does for our system moving forward is it doesn't put us in a position where you're basically racking up the credit card debt. You're not paying for it on a monthly basis when the bill comes in. Anything that gets added in the future, any benefit that gets added in the future, shouldn't just be a product of politics. It shouldn't just be, let's add a benefit because we've got the votes at the legislature or because somebody had this great idea to add something. If we do that, then fine, but we have to fully pay for it in advance, so again, we don't run up the debt. In addition, it's important that we added that at no time will an employer or employee's payment be any less than their share of what's actually determined to be what we call the normal cost. And again, that just kind of fits back to this idea is that you pay the credit card bill when it comes in full, you don't rack up the debt. And for those of you that have been around a while, you'll recall, and no fault to our employers, but the way the plan was structured before, when we were overfunded, there were times where our employers weren't paying some of the full normal costs that were associated with what the system was providing. And this would put a guardrail in there to ensure that that never happens again either. And finally, what we added is not only are we going to have a PSPRS board that makes a lot of decisions that our PSPRS pension faces on a regular basis, but we also added a whole nother advisory board. There are stakeholders in our PSPRS right now who have no say really, or minimal say, or at least I should say minimal participation in the process of the governance of the administration of our PSPRS. Adding this advisory board brings in a lot more stakeholders. It involves involves representations from the tribal communities, from fire districts, and other places like that, to yet put another set of eyes as watchdogs on our plan to be ready to throw up alarm bells if we ever get ourselves in such a situation again. All right, moving on, let's talk about what are the real impacts to the employees, the members of this system. What are the impacts, the fiscal impacts, and what are the impacts in terms of risk analysis moving forward? So a few things. With employees, obviously, as Will spent a lot of time talking about, there are changes specific to those that are in Social Security and those that are not. And we're trying our best. We did our best here. You can't perfectly create perfect equity across all generations and all classes of employees, but we think we produced a lot more equity than the system had prior by doing so. In addition, we've added a new defined contribution benefit. It did not take the place of our defined benefit, but it's a new benefit in addition that works well and intersects well with our defined benefit pensions, and that's for those that are not in Social Security. And in addition, our retired, our current, and our future employees will have the same basic pension benefits that they have today. Some will have to work a little bit longer, some may have to pay a little bit more, but at the end of the day, we end up with the same pension benefits. So let's talk a little bit about the impact on the employers. I showed you this slide a little bit earlier, and it showed the trend line of employer contributions moving forward. Well, what you see there is there's a gap between that yellow line going across the page and the light blue vertical lines that you see, and that gap is a significant cost savings moving forward to our employer contributions. All right.
And it's important to note, Brian, that that debt still has to be paid down.
That's
so
right.
The $7 billion that's already been accumulated over the past several years of unfunded liabilities, the employers still have to pay that down over the next 20 years. But that debt will begin to lessen with this reform almost immediately.
That's exactly right. I keep referring to it as the credit card debt, but they do have to pay that off. But by instigating these reforms, it starts to helps reduce the impact, and it helps de-risk the plan a little bit as well.
And the important thing here on this next slide here is that the total savings to PSPRS over the next 30 years is estimated to be at $3.6 billion. So because this plan fixes the COLA system, puts our new members in a sustainable plan, it's going to save about $3.6 billion and have a 21%, at least a 21% reduction in the long-term liabilities of the fund.
That's right. That's a very significant number, and that was one of the major goals of this effort, is to see how we can reduce costs, reduce liabilities, and stabilize our plan and make it more sustainable moving forward. So
this next one here is kind of how well these proposals met the objectives. This chart was kind of developed by all the different stakeholders, including the legislators, including us. We had some key elements we wanted to make sure were in the plan. One of them is provide retirement security for our members. The reform does that. It retains a sustainable cost of living increase that goes into effect immediately. So there's no more waiting for a COLA like currently. The retirees will not be getting a COLA for the next several years. It will give them a COLA immediately, and it also reduces the unfunded liabilities. The second element, it reduces the cost for both the employers and the employees. The new reform does that. The third thing it does is it stabilizes the contribution rates for the long term with the 50-50 cost sharing. The fourth thing it does is it reduces taxpayer and pension system exposure to financial and market risks. It is a 50% reduction in new hire unfunded liability and a 21% reduction in accrued liabilities over the next 30 years. Another thing it does, which was very important to us, is it ensures the ability to attract 21st century employees. Here the members have a choice. They can go into a defined benefit plan and still have 80% retirement income after 32 years, or if they choose, they can go into a defined contribution plan, which for some might be a better choice. And the sixth and final thing it does is it improves governance and transparency. All the stakeholders agreed on reforms to PSPRS that will improve transparency and also improve communication between the system and the officers and firefighters on the street.
that's right. So let's talk about how we proceed. There is bill language that has been drafted by the attorneys down at the legislature, working in concert with us, with all the stakeholder groups, putting this thing together in writing so we can proceed with some type of plan. That's been worked on around the clock, and that language might be introduced into the legislature as soon as in the next 24 hours. Moving forward from there, our organizations, all of us, the police officers associations, the firefighter associations, the League of Cities and Towns, everybody's going to be communicating with our leadership as well as the folks down at the legislature who are going to be assessing and looking at all the aspects of this bill. We're all in concert. We're all in sync. We're going to be working together to promote the importance of getting this thing done to protect our folks. And we're also going to be in communication with Governor Ducey's office. They've been very attentive to watching this process and helping participate as well. And so we're very hopeful that this will pass. We are up against a deadline because our goal is to put this on the May 17th ballot, because there's a part of this that definitely needs to go to the ballot for approval by the voters. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Some of this does require the voter approval and other parts do not. We are prepared to do a very significant campaign out to the public to let them know how incredibly important this is, not only for their police officers and firefighters, but also for the community at large, because the impacts to public safety this will provide if we're not able to reduce some of these costs. And so we're going to be preparing for this over the next few weeks. We're going to be trying to communicate with you all throughout the state of Arizona as much as possible through all of our outlets, through email, television, through our social networks and everything else. And we may be calling on you to help us. We may be calling on you to talk to your local legislator, calling down to speak with them while they're in session. But we're going to need your help. And I think to end on this note is just know this has not been an easy process. There are elements of this that have been very difficult for us to digest, but our situation is very dire right now. We need to get out of this situation. The risks of inaction are too grossly serious for us not to step up and be leaders. And Will and I have talked about this at length. As police officers and firefighters, people call on us to help solve problems. That's what we all do for a living. And this is just another one of those situations where we have a major problem and we've been called upon to make a difference and to try to help it. And that may involve some sacrifice on our part, but we think overall it's fairly minimal, and I think we can get our system in a much better place. And so, Will, unless you had anything other to say, we can take some questions.
Yeah, let's take some questions. You know, it's been a tough process, but I think a lot of hard work has gone into this through all the stakeholders, not just police and fire. Senator Lesko and the Reason Foundation have also put a lot of work into this.
That's right.
Plan.
Absolutely. So we actually filled the place with an audience of police officers and firefighters, and we want to open it up right now for any questions anybody may have.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Medina, Buckeye Valley Fire District. My question is, what does the new plan do for immediate employer costs?
This plan, once enacted, will have an immediate effect on employer contributions. They will be reduced right away. It'll depend on each employer, depending on their particular circumstances, but it will immediately start to reduce employer costs. Next.
Mike Burkhart, I'm the Gilbert chapter president.
Yes, Mike.
In Gilbert. How long will it take for this plan to become healthy again?
Well, the plan starts to become healthy right away. From the day the bill passes, fixing the PBI, changing it to a COLA, immediately starts the plan on the path to recovery. For it to become fully healthy, 80%, which is commonly known as 80% funded, that will take several years for that to occur, but the path to health starts immediately.
Next question.
Won't this cause officers and firefighters working together to pay different rates?
That is true, but that is the case today. Depending on what happens with the upcoming court case known as Hall, we could have a situation where different generations have different rates of pay. However, what we really tried to work on in this plan was equity. So, for example, right now, those of us out there on the line are paying 11.65%. These new folks that come on the line, they're going to be now paying 9% into their pension and 3% their defined contribution, putting on somewhere around 12%. So we tried to get those numbers as close as possible so there's equity there. But we have that situation today, and if the Hall case decides on behalf of the employees, we'll have some people paying 7.65, others paying 11.65. Sometimes there's just no way around having slight differences between our contribution rates.
And currently, if you're in Tier 1 drop right now, you don't pay anything. in the
That's
system.
correct.
So those
That's
people
exactly
for 5
right.
years don't make any contributions.
Good point. More questions?
I got a question. Josh Campbell, Tucson Firefighters.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the COLA was capped at 2%, and we're now going to be tied to the Consumer Price Index. Can you tell us historically what that CPI has been?
There are some of you will know there are different ways to look at the consumer price index out there. The U.S. Department of Labor breaks it down into different regions. There's like a West region, there's an Arizona CPI, and we looked at all the different ones and looking at those in mass, the one we chose collectively was the Phoenix-Mesa region. But looking at several of the different indexes, we looked at the Phoenix area and the Arizona area for the last 20 to 25 years. And the average CPI has been just under and close to 2% spanning those years, which makes that number, if history is any precursor to what we're going to face in the future, should be right around what it's actually costing people in their livelihoods.
Next, any more questions?
Jerry Gannon from the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. Are the figures you describe in the presentation adjusted for inflation?
It's a good question, Jerry. Yes, they are. All the charts that are described in here are all adjusted for anticipated inflation over the next 30 years.
Joe Clore with the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. What's the likelihood of actually getting a COLA under the new plan?
The likelihood is 100%, as long as there's inflation. So as long as CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, is not zero or negative, which has only happened, I think, 1 or 2 years in the last 30 years, you will get a COLA, an adjustment to your retirement that will compound each year.
Joe Hester with Glendale and the PFFA. There's been a lot of confusion out there with this new tier. Can you kind of explain the difference between what we're hearing across the nation with regards to closing the pension plan versus what the new tier does? Thanks.
Yes, so it's really important that we not close the plan. Anytime you close a plan and as it matures, a plan gets to a point where it starts getting more and more conservative in its investments, and it goes on a whole new path with the idea that the plan will eventually go away. That could be really problematic for our PSPRS plan. When you add a tier to a plan, the plan remains as though it's going to continue in perpetuity. That completely helps retain a sustainable investment profile because all of our assets, no matter what tier you're in, are commingled and invested together to get the best benefits possible. But when you add a new tier like this, basically our assets will be commingled. The only thing is the tier 3 folks are not going to be on the hook for what we'll call some of the sins of the past or the ramifications of the past. They won't be on the hook to pay extra for what I keep referring to as the credit card debt.
Any other questions?
Frank Smith with the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. What is happening to drop?
Great question, and it gets asked almost every day in our travels. First of all, the drop was changed by SB 1609 back in January 2012. That change remains in effect, but there will be no further changes from that point on. So if you were eligible for drop yesterday, you'll be eligible for drop today, and you'll be eligible for drop tomorrow. So everybody that is currently eligible for drop, there are no changes to drop at all. It's really important. We have some people out there who have been hearing rumors or in this fear place where they think, oh my gosh, I better go out and drop because it's going to go away. That is absolutely not true. If they're eligible today, they'll be eligible tomorrow. Please make your retirement plans based on your best situation with the advice and whoever you use to counsel you. Don't go running into drop before this hats because there will be no impact whatsoever.
So what you're saying, Brian, is that everybody hired before January 1st, 2012, that's either eligible for the contributory drop or the non-contributory drop will still be eligible going
That is
forward.
exactly what I'm saying.
Good.
More questions?
Quick question regarding the 401A and our 457s. Is this new plan going to change the employer contributions at all to this?
No, this plan has nothing to change. Some of the agencies out there have negotiated, their unions have negotiated, or the employer has just done it voluntarily where they put extra employer contributions into a 457 plan or a 401A plan. This plan does not do anything to change that, reduce that. It still allows the associations to go and bargain to increase that in the future. Any other questions?
Joe Hester again. How will this affect like disability retirements and line of duty death?
This plan does not change the disability retirements or the death benefits at all. There's even reference in the statute that refer back to the existing disability and death benefit statutes, so this plan will not change that at all. You'll still have disability retirements for those who get disabled on the job, and you'll still have death benefits for those who get killed, unfortunately, in the line of duty.
Ken Crane with Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. How does the pension protection clause of the Arizona State Constitution impact this plan that's being proposed? There are a lot of people have concerns and feel that, hey, you know, there's certain protections in the Constitution, you can't change things. How could you speak to that for a minute?
Sure. Yeah, it's very interesting how we're dealing with the pension clause. We're very fortunate here in Arizona to have that pension clause as a protection. It gives us a degree of confidence that our pensions and our futures for us and our families are not going to be toyed with on a year-to-year basis. We feel that's incredibly important. However, because we're in a crisis, we have to make a change to be able to bring about the new change that we've talked about. Well, our attorneys and the attorneys down at the legislature, a lot of folks have been working feverishly to figure out a way to do that. I mentioned before that we have to go out and campaign and take something to the voters. This is the specific issue we must ask of the voters, and that is to make a one-time change to the Constitution that allows us to essentially open the door temporarily, shove some reforms through, and then shut that door and seal it and lock it and weld it again. And I know that that causes folks a lot of concern, but the way that works is this. We have a very little used piece of Arizona law known as conditional enactment. And what that means is you can run a bill through the legislature, and when it comes out of the legislature, it really has no effect whatsoever until it is enacted by a vote of the citizenry. And the way that that would work is we'd go to the state constitution, which currently says shall neither diminish nor impair pension benefits, and to say we shall neither diminish nor impair benefits except for provisions in the bill that's going to come out. And people have concerns about that, and it's very understandable. However, if you look back, there was another crisis facing Arizona many, many years ago back in the 30s, and it happened to do with workers' comp. Workers' comp was going into a crisis because they had fiscal problems, just like we're facing in the pension. They had folks that were getting too excessive amounts because of their particular professions, and they found themselves maybe going bankrupt. So just like we're doing today, a lot of folks from the workers, a lot of folks from the legislature, the governor's office, and a lot of attorneys got together and figured out how can they make a one-time change to workers' comp to get the system in a better place again. And they used this exact methodology that we're reflecting back on to utilize. And it's this notion of conditional enactment. They made a one-time change, pushed through the reforms, and then enacted them, and the system got better again. We're basically carbon copying what they did back then, and it's important because those who have concerns about that need to reflect back on and realize that that has standed the test of legal scrutiny going all the way back to the 1930s, which gives us confidence moving forward.
Well, I think it's just important to reiterate that, again, the only thing going to the ballot is just the PBI/COLA mechanism. Nothing else is going to the ballot. The only thing that the voters are going to be asked to vote on is changing from the PBI to the new COLA structure.
That's right.
Tim Bayardi from the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association. Doesn't this open up the door for them to come in and make more radical changes?
I think it's important to understand that, first of all, the coalition that has come together to do this, everybody is very committed to get enacted and then protect what we've just done. And what we think we've learned with Prop 487 in Phoenix and some other proposals out there is if everybody isn't together, the chances of something being successful are pretty unlikely, okay? Now, does that mean that some groups couldn't go try to do this with the Constitution someday in the future ever again? I can't make that guarantee, but understand that the only way that this is possible today is because police officers and firefighters and the governor's office and the legislature and a lot of other folks willing to put all their resources into doing that. The chance of that type of coalition doing so again, I think, are very unlikely, but conditional enactment is there. It can be used by somebody, but if we're not in support of it, I would venture to say it probably is not going to pass.
And I'd just like to add that for everybody, I appreciate everybody coming today, and I know there'll be a lot of people watching this online, and it will be emailed out and YouTube for all the membership of both police and fire to see over the next month or so. If anybody has any questions, I encourage you to reach out to myself through PLEA or Brian through the PFFA, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you guys have or any thoughts that you guys have.
We know there's going to be many more questions, and we're here to answer those questions, and we're here. But I got to say that I know I speak for everybody here, is we're so proud of our police officers and firefighters, because this is difficult. We're going to be the first ones in the country to step up and be proactive in forming a solution. And you know, it's easy to step back and draw a line in the sand and fight over these things, but our system is in dire need of help. And I'm very proud of our folks. We all took an oath to protect and serve our citizens. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to fix our system, and hopefully the next generation will not have to deal with something like this ever again. But reach out to us. I know members out there are going to have tons of questions, from retirees to the new rookies out on the street. We'll make ourselves available. We're glad to take them by email or whatever you like, and we're glad to come also to your places of work or what have you and speak on these issues as well. So thank you all again also for being here. Thank you, Will, for being a good partner. We've
Yes, sir.
worked well together on this project. It's been one for the books, I'll tell you that much. And thank you all for tuning in and watching the video, and let us know if you have any questions. Take care and be safe.